They came to pillage a widow's home, but a Mohawk outcast made them pay the price. The wind cut through the open plains of the frontier world like a cold knife. Dust swirled over the red soil, carrying with it the faint scent of iron and ash. Small settlements dotted the landscape, scattered across the hills and valleys, each clinging stubbornly to life in this harsh world. Among them, on the edge of a small river bend, stood a lone homestead, a modest wooden structure surrounded by a rough fence, almost hidden among the rocks and sparse trees. This was the home of Clara, a widow, and her young son, Eli. Clara had lived here for 2 years since her husband had fallen in a mining accident. She had rebuilt the home herself, block by block, and had learned to survive alone. Every day was a battle against hunger, storms, and the endless heat of the planet's sun. Yet despite the hardships, she kept her spirit strong for her son and for the memory of the man she had loved. Eli, small but sharp-eyed, ran barefoot along the fence line, chasing a wild lizard that darted through the stones. He laughed, a bright sound in a lonely world, unaware of the shadows that were about to descend upon them. Far beyond the homestead, dark shapes moved across the horizon. A group of riders, more machine than flesh, cut through the plains with unnatural speed. Their armor reflected the sun in harsh flashes, and their weapons, long black rifles and energy lances, humans had never seen before. These were the raiders, mercenaries from the outer colonies, known for their cruelty and greed. They hunted human settlements for anything they could take, leaving nothing but ashes behind. The wind shifted, carrying their scent to the homestead. Clara paused in her chores, eyes narrowing. Something felt wrong. The birds had gone silent. The river, usually alive with frogs and fish, seemed still. Her heart thumped in her chest, warning her that danger was near. Somewhere among the distant rocks, a lone figure watched. He was not part of the settlement, not part of any village. Dakota, a Mohawk outcast, had wandered this world for months. He had been exiled from his clan for defying corrupt elders, for refusing to follow orders that he knew were wrong. He had learned to survive alone, moving like a shadow across the plains, unseen and unheard. Dakota's dark eyes scanned the horizon. The raiders were too confident, too loud. They carried themselves like they were invincible. But Dakota had seen too much to be intimidated. He studied them carefully, their formation, the way they moved, the shine of their weapons. Each detail mattered. He knew the human settlements were defenseless if no one acted. He sighed and tightened the straps of his leather armor. His quiver held only a few arrows, but he carried a bow that had been passed down in his family for generations. The bow was simple, but it had never failed him. His mind raced, planning how he could stop these invaders without exposing himself too soon. He had faced raiders before, but never like these. They were organized, brutal, and they expected fear. Dakota had none to give. Back at the homestead, Clara moved quickly. She barricaded doors and windows, piling furniture and crates to slow any intruders. Eli watched, confused. "Mother, why are we doing this?" he asked, his small voice trembling. Clara kneeled to his level. "Listen to me, Eli."
We may have visitors, and they are not friendly. We have to protect our home.
"Stay quiet, stay hidden, and do exactly as I say." Eli nodded, trying to be brave. He hid behind a stack of firewood, peeking through the cracks, heart pounding in his chest. He trusted his mother completely, but the fear in his eyes was impossible to hide. The raiders drew closer, kicking up clouds of red dust. They laughed and shouted in harsh, alien tongues. Their leader, a tall figure in black armor with a face hidden behind a mirrored visor, waved his hand. "Spread out," he barked. "No survivors." That home will be ours by nightfall. Dakota crouched behind a ridge, examining their movement. He noticed something the raiders had not considered. They relied on numbers and technology, but they underestimated cunning and patience. He could strike, but one mistake would cost lives. He needed the perfect moment. He moved silently down the ridge, placing small traps in the dust, tying thin wires to rocks that could trip the raiders' horses or destabilize their vehicles. He set simple snares, nothing deadly yet, just enough to slow them down and create confusion. The human spirit thrived on ingenuity, and Dakota was about to remind them of that. The first raider scouts arrived at the edge of the homestead. Clara held her breath, gripping a sharpened metal rod. Eli's small hands clutched her skirt, shaking. The scouts circled the home, their rifles scanning for movement. The widow and her child remained perfectly still, barely daring to breathe. Suddenly, a rope snapped, sending a rock tumbling into one scout's path. He stumbled, yelping in shock. Another scout tripped over a wire Dakota had set, falling face first into the dirt. Confused, they called out to each other, their confident movements slowing. Dakota's lips curved in a small smile. The humans had the advantage of knowing the land, of thinking like prey who had survived for centuries against greater forces. And right now, he was their invisible ally, their ghost in the shadows. The raiders regrouped, frustrated. "Move faster!" The leader's voice roared through a comlink. "They will not wait for us." Dakota ducked behind a boulder, waiting for the right moment to strike again. He knew he could not stop all of them at once, but he could sow chaos, and chaos could be deadly. Hours passed like this, the sun climbing higher and burning the plains. Clara and Eli stayed hidden, hearts pounding with every sound. Dust swirled around the homestead as the raiders searched for an entrance. They tried doors, windows, and even attempted to cut through the fence. Dakota's traps made each attempt harder, slowing them down, frustrating them, and making them doubt their plan. Finally, Dakota saw his opportunity. A small group of raiders separated from the main force, moving closer to the homestead. He knocked an arrow, careful and precise. With a whisper of movement, the arrow flew, striking a support beam and causing it to collapse with a loud crash. The raiders shouted in alarm, stumbling back. Clara gasped, realizing someone was fighting on their side. She peeked through a crack and saw a figure moving with deadly grace, striking from the shadows, never seen clearly, always elusive. Dakota had become more than a shadow. He was their protector. The raiders regrouped, now wary and suspicious. They looked at each other, uncertain, their confidence shaken. One of them whispered, "What kind of humans are these?" Dakota crouched low, observing every movement, planning the next trap. He could hear the heartbeat of the land in his chest, every sound of the wind and the dust telling him the best moment to strike. He did not rush. Patience was his greatest weapon. As the day wore on, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the homestead. Dakota prepared for one final ambush before nightfall. He moved silently, positioning rocks and arrows, using the terrain to his advantage. Clara watched, awe and fear in her eyes. Eli clutched her arm, trembling. Then, the raiders moved too close to the edge of the riverbank. Dakota released a small boulder, sending it crashing into the lead vehicle. It toppled over, crushing the engine and trapping the raiders inside. Confusion erupted. Some shouted, some fired blindly. Dakota moved like a shadow, striking precisely, never exposing himself fully. By the time the sun disappeared below the horizon, the raiders had been slowed, their morale broken. They had lost men, vehicles, and confidence. The widow's home remained standing, almost untouched, thanks to the unseen Mohawk Outcast who had turned fear into hope. Clara finally stepped outside, cautious but relieved. "Who are you?" she whispered into the darkness. Dakota emerged from the shadows, tall and silent, bow in hand, eyes glinting in the fading light. "A friend," he said simply. "For now." Eli ran to him, wide-eyed. "Are you a warrior?" he asked. Dakota knelt, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "I am someone who does what must be done," he replied. "And you, little one, have courage. Never forget that." Clara studied him, seeing the scars of past battles etched into his face and the strength in his frame. She nodded slowly. "Then I guess we are lucky," she said. Dakota smiled faintly, but his eyes never left the horizon. He knew this was only the beginning. The raiders would return, more ruthless than before, and next time they would not underestimate humans. But for now, he had given them a fighting chance, and that was enough. As night fell over the frontier world, the widow, her son, and the lone outcast stood together, united against the darkness. In the distance, the wind carried the faint sound of the defeated raiders retreating, a reminder that human courage and cunning could stand against even the deadliest of foes. And Dakota, the outcast, disappeared into the shadows once more, leaving behind hope where the night had settled over the frontier world like a heavy blanket, softening the harsh outlines of rocks and hills. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the faint scent of dust, blood, and the faint smoke from the raiders' retreat. The homestead was quiet now. Clara sat beside a small fire outside, Eli sleeping fitfully under a blanket she had sewn from scraps. Her hands shook slightly as she repaired the fence that had been damaged in the day's chaos. Clara's thoughts kept returning to the figure who had saved them. Dakota, the outcast Mohawk. She had watched him move through the chaos, silent and deadly, a shadow that struck only when it counted. She had seen no armor like his, no weapons like his, but his skill, his speed, and his courage had been undeniable. He had saved her home. He had saved her son. But she also knew one thing: he would not stay. Outcasts like him didn't linger. They moved with the wind, appearing when needed and vanishing when their work was done. She worried about him, though she had no right to. She only hoped he was safe. Dakota crouched atop a ridge a few miles from the homestead, watching the raiders regroup near a dry riverbed. Their vehicles were damaged, but not destroyed. Their wounded groaned, and their leader barked orders, furious at their failure. Dakota observed everything. He knew they would return, and they would come stronger next time. That was why he had to act before they reached the village again. He studied the raiders' movements, noting weaknesses. They were heavily armed, but slow. They relied on machines that could be trapped or destroyed. And, most importantly, they underestimated humans. That would be their mistake. The next morning, Clara rose before the sun, checking her home and the perimeter. She still feared the raiders would return, but she also felt something new: hope. Dakota had shown her that even one person could change the outcome, even against enemies who seemed unstoppable. Suddenly, a movement caught her eye. Through the early mist, a figure appeared on the ridge beyond the trees. Dakota. He moved like a ghost, silent and fluid. Clara's breath caught. "You're back," she whispered, stepping closer to the fire to signal him. Dakota nodded. "I need your help," he said, voice low and steady. "The raiders will return. They are gathering more forces. I can slow them, but I cannot do it alone. Your home, your son, and the village, they cannot defend themselves fully." Clara's eyes widened. I help? I am just one woman. What can I do? Cleverness, courage, and a willingness to act, Dakota said simply. You have all three. I only need to show you how to use them. For hours, Dakota trained Clara. He taught her to move quietly, to listen for sounds in the wind, to spot traps, and to understand the terrain. He showed her how to use the homestead itself as a weapon, barricades, hidden pitfalls, and clever decoys. Each lesson was simple, practical, and deadly if used correctly. Clara learned quickly. Her fear melted under Dakota's guidance, replaced by determination. Eli watched from a distance, fascinated by the strange warrior who moved like wind and shadow. As the sun rose higher, they spotted the raiders approach again. This time, Dakota's plan was clear. He had divided the raiders into smaller groups, isolating scouts and reinforcements before they could reach the homestead. He moved silently among the rocks and hills, signaling Clara when to act. The first group of raiders came over a small rise, unaware of the hidden traps Dakota had set the night before. A simple rope and rock contraption sent one rider tumbling down the slope, scattering his pack and startling his comrades. Another group triggered hidden wires that released spiked barricades from the trees, injuring a few and slowing their advance. Clara took her place at the homestead, hidden behind a stack of crates. She watched the raiders stumble into traps, then acted quickly, pouring boiling water from a kettle onto one who had slipped too close. Eli gasped, his eyes wide, but Dakota gave a small nod of approval. Good, he whispered. You are learning. The raiders' leader cursed loudly, frustrated at the repeated ambushes. This is impossible, he shouted. Humans cannot fight like this. They are weak. They cannot survive us. Dakota smirked from his hiding place. Humans were often underestimated. That arrogance would be their downfall. The day became a series of small battles, each designed to confuse and wear down the raiders. Dakota struck from above cliffs, sending boulders to crash into their vehicles. Clara set traps at the homestead, forcing the raiders into tight spaces where they could be neutralized quickly. Even Eli helped in small ways, moving quietly to help set simple tripwires under Dakota's careful supervision. By mid-afternoon, the raiders were exhausted and disorganized. Dakota's strategy had worked perfectly. They had superior weapons and numbers, but their arrogance and lack of knowledge about the terrain had turned their strengths into weaknesses. Still, Dakota knew this was not enough. The raiders would not give up. They would regroup, bring more forces, and return stronger. That's when he decided to strike at their leader. If the leader fell, the rest of the group would lose morale. Clara looked at him, worry in her eyes. You cannot face him alone. Even you. I have no choice, Dakota said calmly. I can fight, but the leader must be stopped. We do this smart, not reckless. Follow my plan, and we will survive. Dakota moved like a shadow through the rocks, approaching the main raider camp. He studied their positions carefully, memorizing every weapon, every patrol, every weak point. Then, in a series of silent, precise moves, he struck. Arrows flew, ropes snapped, and boulders crashed. The camp erupted into chaos. Raiders screamed, firing blindly into the trees. Dakota struck from the shadows, taking down one after another without revealing himself fully. Clara and Eli watched from the homestead, amazed and terrified. They had never seen skill like this. Fear turned into admiration. She realized that Dakota's presence was more than protection. It was hope. By evening, the raiders were in full retreat again. Their leader had survived, but his forces were shattered, scattered, and demoralized. Dakota had achieved what seemed impossible. One man against many had turned the tide. As the sun set, Dakota returned to the homestead. He was bloodied and tired, but his spirit remained unbroken. Clara ran to him, helping him inside. She poured water over his hands and cleaned the blood from his face.
"You are amazing," she said quietly. "I cannot believe one person could do all this."
Dakota shook his head.
I am not amazing. I am determined. Humans survive because we adapt, because we are clever, and because we do not give up. He looked at Eli, who had stayed wide-eyed but silent. And courage comes in all sizes, even in small humans. The widow smiled faintly, a spark of hope in her eyes. For the first time in years, she felt that survival was possible, not just for her, but for the village, and maybe even for the wider human settlements on this harsh world. That night, they sat around the fire together, talking quietly. Dakota shared stories of his clan, of battles fought and lessons learned. Clara shared her own stories of life on the frontier, of resilience and of loss. Eli listened, fascinated by both, learning about courage and skill from people he could already see were heroes. Outside, the wind carried the faint cries of retreating raiders, but Dakota's eyes never left the horizon. He knew this victory was temporary. The raiders would return, and next time they would bring more numbers, more weapons, and more cruelty. But now, Clara and the villagers were ready, and they had learned that humans were never helpless. In the quiet of the night, Dakota thought about his place in this world. Exiled, alone, but needed. He realized that perhaps being an outcast was not a curse, but a gift. He could act where others could not, strike where others would hesitate, and guide humans who had forgotten their own strength. Clara noticed the change in him. "You are not just a warrior," she said softly. "You are something more. You are a protector." Dakota simply nodded. Words were not always necessary. His actions spoke louder than any praise could. He had come for one purpose, to defend life where it was threatened, and he would continue to do so. As the first stars appeared in the night sky, Eli yawned and leaned against Dakota. "Will you stay?" he asked sleepily. Dakota looked down at the boy, a faint smile on his lips. "For now," he said, "but remember this, little one. Strength is not always in numbers or weapons. It is in courage, in cleverness, and in protecting what matters most. Never forget that." Clara watched them both, feeling a rare peace in her heart. They had survived the first attack, but more challenges awaited. She knew the days ahead would test them, but with Dakota by their side, she also knew they could face anything. And so, under the stars on a quiet frontier world, a widow, her son, and a lone Mohawk outcast began to prepare for the battles yet to come. They were not just surviving, they were learning to fight, to adapt, and to defy the odds. For the humans of this harsh world, hope had returned, carried on the shoulders of one determined shadow. The frontier sun rose slowly over the dusty plains, casting long shadows across the homestead. Clara moved quietly, checking the barricades and traps she and Dakota had prepared. The events of the past days weighed heavily on her, but she no longer felt fear. Instead, a strange sense of determination had taken root. She had learned to think like Dakota, to anticipate danger, and to act decisively. Eli, energetic despite the events of yesterday, helped reinforce the fence and keep watch. Dakota, crouched on a ridge overlooking the horizon, studied the distant movement of dust clouds. He squinted, his dark eyes narrowing. The raiders were returning, and they were not alone this time. More vehicles, more weapons, more soldiers. Clearly, their leader had gathered reinforcements after the humiliating retreat. "They are stronger than yesterday," Clara whispered, approaching him. "How can we face them?" Dakota shook his head. "Strength is not always in numbers. Yesterday we survived because we were clever. Today we will do more than survive. We will make them regret ever coming here." Clara swallowed hard. She had seen his skill, his patience, and his courage. She trusted him. "Then, show me what to do." Dakota spent the morning studying the terrain. He pointed out natural choke points, narrow passes, hidden ravines, and shallow gullies that could be used to funnel the raiders into traps. He instructed Clara to prepare decoy fires and false barricades to lure the enemies into the kill zones. Eli ran messages and helped move small supplies quietly under Dakota's guidance. By midday, everything was in place. The first Raider scouts appeared on the horizon. Their movements were more cautious this time. Clearly, they remembered yesterday's chaos, but they were too confident in their reinforcements and weapons. They underestimated the humans who had outsmarted them once. Dakota observed silently, waiting for the perfect moment. He motioned Clara to take her position by a false barricade. "Do not strike unless I signal," he warned. The scouts moved closer, their armored vehicles glinting in the sun. One approached the homestead directly, looking for an opening. Clara tensed, hand on the handle of her improvised weapon. Then Dakota released his signal. A small rock dropped from the ridge above, striking a metal plate with a loud clang. Immediately, the trap was triggered. Hidden spikes rose from the ground beneath the scout's vehicle, flipping it over. The scout screamed, trapped and disoriented. The other raiders hesitated, unsure of the source of the sudden attack. Dakota moved like a shadow, taking advantage of the confusion. Arrows flew with deadly precision, striking vehicles' engines and disabling weapons before the enemies could react. The battlefield had shifted. The raiders, who had come confident and organized, were now confused and afraid. Dakota led the attack with the precision of a master strategist, moving silently between hills, cliffs, and gullies, striking only when the moment was perfect. Each arrow, each trap, each calculated ambush slowly tore the enemy forces apart. Clara found herself acting with instinct she never knew she had. She triggered a hidden pitfall, causing a small vehicle to tumble into a shallow ravine. She hurled rocks to distract approaching raiders, then struck one with a makeshift spear when he stumbled too close. Her heart pounded, but the adrenaline sharpened her mind. Eli watched from a safe distance, cheering quietly every time they outsmarted a raider. Hours passed in a blur of dust, smoke, and noise. Dakota's tactics forced the raiders to split into smaller groups, preventing them from using their numbers effectively. The humans used the terrain to their advantage. Narrow passes became traps, cliffs provided cover for silent strikes, and the homestead became the center of a web of cunning defenses. The raiders' leader, seeing the chaos, roared in frustration. "Stop this madness!" he shouted into his calm. "They are humans. They are weak. Yet they fight like demons. Bring them down." Dakota watched him from a ridge, his mind racing. He knew a direct assault on the leader would be dangerous. This was a man surrounded by soldiers and armored vehicles. But if the leader fell, the rest of the raiders would lose heart. Dakota began to plan his approach. He noticed the leader moving toward a small plateau, trying to rally his scattered forces. Dakota climbed silently to a higher ridge, overlooking the plateau. From this vantage, he could see every detail: guards, positions, and weak points in the vehicles. He nocked an arrow, aimed carefully, and let it fly. It struck the leader's vehicle, puncturing a fuel cell. Flames erupted instantly. The raiders screamed, some fleeing in panic, others firing blindly into the air. Clara watched in disbelief as smoke and fire rose from the plateau.
He did it, she whispered. He actually did it.
Dakota did not celebrate.
He moved quickly, using the chaos to isolate small groups of raiders. His attacks were precise and surgical. No wasted movements, no unnecessary risks. One by one, the raiders fell, either captured or driven into traps. Each strike reinforced the lesson the humans had learned. Courage, skill, and cleverness could overcome brute strength and superior technology. By evening, the raiders' forces were shattered. The survivors retreated in disarray, leaving behind wounded comrades and damaged vehicles. The leader had escaped, but Dakota had sent a clear message. Humans were not weak. Humans were not to be underestimated. Clara approached him as the dust settled. "They will come back, won't they?" she asked, fear and admiration in her voice. "Yes, and next time they will bring more. But now they know we can fight. They know humans are not easy prey. And we have learned something too." "What have we learned?" Clara asked. "That unity and cleverness are stronger than weapons," Dakota said. "That courage comes in many forms, from a single mother defending her home, to a boy learning to fight, to an outcast who has nothing to lose. Together, we are strong." Eli ran up to Dakota, excitement shining in his eyes. "Can I fight next time too?" he asked eagerly. Dakota knelt, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "One step at a time," he said. "First, learn to survive. Then, learn to protect. And when the time comes, you will fight. Not because it is easy, but because it is necessary." Clara watched the exchange, feeling a surge of pride and hope. The fear that had gripped her in the first attack was gone. She understood now that survival was not just about hiding or fleeing. It was about strategy, courage, and using every advantage the land provided. As night fell, Dakota moved silently through the perimeter, checking traps and reinforcing weak points. He shared techniques with Clara for improvising weapons and creating new defenses. Eli listened intently, absorbing everything. For the first time, the future did not seem bleak. It seemed possible. Dakota paused on a ridge, looking at the stars. He thought about his clan, his exile, and the life he had chosen. He realized that perhaps this frontier world was his new clan, and Clara, Eli, and the villagers were his responsibility, not because they asked for it, but because he knew it was right. He had been alone for so long, yet here he had a purpose. The quiet of the night was broken by a faint sound, distant, mechanical, and menacing. Dakota's eyes narrowed. The raiders were regrouping again. This time they would not come quietly, but he was ready, and so were the humans. Clara joined him silently on the ridge. "Do you think we can really stop them?" she asked. Dakota looked down at the homestead, at the boy asleep under the blanket, at the fences and traps they had built together. "We do not just stop them," he said softly. "We show them the cost of underestimating humans. We turn their arrogance into their defeat." And with that, the three, widow, boy, and outcast, stood together under the stars, ready to face the rising storm. The frontier world was harsh. The enemies were cruel. But humans had learned a truth they would never forget. Cleverness, courage, and unity could turn the tide, no matter how impossible the odds seemed. The next would be harder, deadlier, and more desperate. But humans never gave up, and neither would Dakota. For tonight, they could rest. Tomorrow, they would turn the tables. The frontier sun rose red and heavy over the plains, casting a blood-like glow across the homestead and surrounding hills. Birds had long since fled, leaving only the whispering wind. Clara tightened her hands around a sharpened metal rod, her eyes scanning the horizon. She no longer trembled at the thought of raiders. Yesterday and the day before had taught her what humans could do when they refused to be cowed. Eli peered around her legs, nervous but alert. He had spent hours learning from Dakota, observing traps and practicing quiet movement. Now, at 9 years old, he felt the weight of responsibility. He was no longer just a child. He was part of this battle. Dakota crouched on a ridge several hundred meters from the homestead, his dark eyes scanning the approaching dust clouds. This time, there was no mistake. This was the full force of the raiders. Vehicles, soldiers, and alien beasts mounted for war rolled steadily across the plains. Their leader, a towering figure in black armor, rode at the front, exuding confidence. He had learned from past failures, yet he still underestimated the humans who had cost him so much. Dakota's mind raced. This would be the final stand. The raiders' arrogance and experience made them dangerous, but he knew the land, he knew the humans, and he had the will to fight. He signaled to Clara, who had taken her place at the homestead. She nodded, understanding the plan: traps, deception, and precise attacks to divide and weaken the enemy. The raiders split their forces, attempting to encircle the homestead. They had learned caution from previous encounters, but they still relied on superior numbers and weapons. Dakota had anticipated this. Every trap, every hidden pitfall, every decoy fire had been prepared for this moment. The first vehicles moved into the narrow pass Dakota had chosen as the ambush site. Suddenly, rocks tumbled from the cliffs above, crashing into engines and sending machines spinning into the dust. Clara triggered a hidden mechanism, releasing spikes that pierced tires and hooves alike. The raiders screamed, some thrown violently from their mounts. Dakota moved like a shadow through the rocks, firing arrows that struck engines and weapons with precision. Chaos erupted. The raiders, expecting an easy attack, were met with destruction from every direction. Dakota's tactics were flawless, using the terrain to amplify his advantage. He isolated small groups, striking quickly and vanishing before the enemy could retaliate. But the raiders were clever too. They adapted, forming tighter formations, advancing cautiously, and using fire to flush out hidden humans. Dakota had anticipated this as well. He led Clara and Eli in a series of calculated retreats, drawing the raiders into traps where they could be neutralized one by one. Eli's small hands trembled as he set a tripwire under Dakota's instruction. The first raider who stepped on it tumbled into a pit filled with spikes. He screamed, a warning to others. But the humans did not stop. They were focused, united, and unafraid. Dakota moved among them like a silent guardian, striking when needed, guiding, protecting, and teaching. The battle intensified. The raiders brought forward heavy vehicles, armored and armed with plasma cannons. They believed these would break the humans' defenses, but Dakota had planned for this. Hidden pits, boulders, and improvised barricades slowed the machines, funneling them into narrow channels where their size became a liability. Arrows, ropes, and fire rained down, exploiting every weakness. Clara watched in awe. The widow who had once feared for her life was now actively participating in the defense. She hurled rocks at approaching raiders, triggered pit traps, and helped move debris to block paths. Her hands were blistered and bloody, but her spirit burned brighter than ever. Eli followed her example, small but brave, assisting in minor but critical ways. From his vantage point, Dakota saw the raiders' leader advancing, confident that sheer numbers and technology would crush the humans. Takoda's eyes narrowed. He had waited for this moment. The leader would not escape this time. He needed to fall, and the humans needed a decisive victory. Takoda climbed higher on a ridge, positioning himself for the perfect shot. He studied the leader's movements, noting the guards and armored mounts. Then, with a deep breath, he let an arrow fly. It struck the leader's vehicle in a critical engine joint. Flames erupted immediately, and chaos spread through the enemy ranks. The raiders panicked, trying to save their leader while avoiding Takoda's relentless strikes. Clara and Eli, inspired by Takoda's courage, pressed forward. Clara triggered multiple traps, her movements swift and confident. Eli rolled rocks down slopes to block advancing vehicles, watching them crash into hidden pits. The humans were no longer fighting defensively. They were taking the battle to the enemy, using intelligence, courage, and every advantage the land provided. The raiders' formation collapsed. Soldiers fled in all directions, vehicles overturned or destroyed. Takoda moved like a shadow, striking isolated groups with deadly precision. Every human action was amplified by his guidance. Humans, clever and courageous, were proving that the raiders' technology and numbers were not enough to dominate. The final confrontation came when the leader, dismounted from his vehicle, tried to rally his remaining forces. Takoda moved silently through the chaos, approaching the leader from behind. The leader turned, surprised by the sudden appearance of the Mohawk Outcast. Takoda's bow was drawn, an arrow aimed precisely. "You underestimated humans," Takoda said calmly. "You thought we were weak. You were wrong." The leader sneered, raising his weapon, but Takoda was faster. The arrow struck true, disabling the leader's armor and sending him sprawling into the dust. His forces, seeing their commander fall, panicked completely. Takoda pressed the advantage, moving with skill and deadly precision, ensuring the remaining raiders could not regroup. By nightfall, the battlefield was silent except for the groans of the wounded and the distant crackle of small fires. The raiders had been decisively defeated. Their leader, incapacitated, their forces scattered. They would not return easily. Takoda, Clara, and Eli stood together, bloodied but victorious. Clara approached Takoda, awe and gratitude in her eyes. "You saved us," she whispered. "All of us." Takoda shook his head. "We saved each other," he said. "Humans survive because we do not give up, because we use our minds, our courage, and each other. Today, we fought not just to survive, but to show what humans can do." Eli ran up, hugging Takoda's leg. "I want to be brave like you," he said, voice full of wonder. Takoda crouched, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Bravery is not about being fearless," he said. "It is about standing and acting when others would run. You have it already. You only need to learn to trust it." Clara looked around at the battlefield. Though scarred and broken, it also held a strange beauty. Humans had fought with intelligence, courage, and determination. They had turned impossible odds into victory. Takoda looked toward the horizon, where the faint glow of the raiders' retreat could be seen. He knew this was not the end. More challenges would come, more threats would rise, but humans had learned a vital truth. They were not weak. They were clever, resilient, and capable of incredible feats when their homes, families, and lives were at stake. The homestead had survived. Clara's courage had grown. Eli had seen what humans could do. And Takoda, the Mohawk Outcast, had proven that one determined individual, acting with skill and strategy, could turn the tide against superior forces. That night, under the stars, They sat around a fire, silent but proud. The battle was over, for now. But humans had learned something greater than victory. They had learned their own power. Dakota, his dark eyes reflecting the flames, spoke softly. Remember this: humans are never powerless. When we fight with courage, when we think with our minds, when we protect what matters most, no enemy is unbeatable. Clara nodded, tears of relief and pride in her eyes. And we will remember, she said, always. Eli yawned, leaning against Dakota. I want to fight with you next time, he said sleepily. Dakota smiled faintly, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. One step at a time, little one. First, survive, then protect. And when the time comes, fight, not for glory, but because it is right. The stars twinkled over the frontier world, indifferent and eternal. Yet on this small patch of dust and rock, humanity had stood tall, defied the odds, and proven that courage and cleverness could overcome even the deadliest foes. And somewhere beyond the horizon, Dakota knew the raiders would plan their revenge. But for now, humans had won. They had fought, survived, and learned that the true strength of humanity was not weapons or numbers. It was in courage, unity, and the will to protect what mattered most. The final stand had been won, but the war was far from over. Still, humans now had the confidence to face anything the galaxy could throw at them, and to emerge victorious.